Welcome to The Snap with Alexis Perry and Sydney Jones.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Broncos Podcast Network for another edition of The Snap. I'm Alexis Perry, joined by the one and only Sydney Jones. And for the final week of the season, we are so excited to have the first woman to ever call a nationally televised NFL game and the voice that you will hear this Sunday when you tune into the Broncos-Raiders game on CBS, Beth Mowins. Beth, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy week to join us here on The Snap. First off, happy holidays to you and yours. I know this has been a crazy busy holiday season. How's yours gone so far?
So far, so good. Got our fingers crossed. Doing our part, I think, like everybody else, and trying to stay socially distanced, but still being able to say hello to family and friends from afar. And so, I love this kind of time of year because you have the overlapping seasons of a lot of different sports going on. And just like you guys growing up a sports fan, I love to see the overlap and especially as we get closer now to the NFL postseason.
Well, I kept saying all I wanted for Christmas was for the Broncos to get a season series sweep over the Chargers again this year. But since that didn't happen, my new holiday wish is for the Broncos to just start 2021 off with a win and carry some of that momentum into the offseason. What have you seen from this Denver team this season that gives you some hope that the future for this team is really bright?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities between both of these teams in terms of young talent that I think will be given a chance to grow. I think that for both sides, you look back at the schedule, you hate to play, the woulda, coulda, shoulda game, but
Right.
there are games that the Broncos, had an opportunity to win and were not able to close it out down the stretch. The Raiders have some of those as well on their schedule. So I don't think that either side was that far off, from flirting with the playoffs. And that is obviously the ideal for every team. You want to be in the chase as long as you can and to get to the postseason. So it was a rough week last week, obviously, for Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy. But I think those are, some pieces that will be a big decision this offseason for the Broncos if they're going to stick with Drew and give him the chance to grow into the job. Jerry Jeudy, obviously a first round guy. I think that they think awfully highly of him and that he'll be able to bounce back. So to be able to be in a lot of close games, even without Von Miller and without a lot of the injuries that they had on the defensive side of the ball, I think there are still some great building blocks. You take a look at a guy like Justin Simmons, who's such a great guy in the community and in that locker room that I think they're going to be able to figure some things out.
Like you mentioned, Beth, both the Broncos and the Raiders have been eliminated from the playoffs this season, but there's still plenty to play for in a ton of bad blood between these two teams. So Beth, what excites you the most about this matchup on Sunday?
Oh boy. I don't think that either team statistically has been very good defending against the run. And certainly it is something that the Raiders will want to get back to. They were able to run the ball real well the first half of the season, not so much the second half of the season. And I think that was a big reason why their record turned around. And, I think it's something that the Broncos definitely want to try and establish as well. What is left in the tank for Melvin Gordon moving forward? Unfortunately, they won't get another look at Phillip Lindsay, but I think that running back room is something else that they want to take a look at. So, this is one of those big rivalry games that goes back to 1960. They don't like each other very much. And I think the important thing to remember as fans and as broadcasters, for a lot of these guys, their shelf life, their opportunity to play in the NFL is very short-lived. So for a lot of them, this is a huge audition, whether they're going to stay with their teams or move on. And that's how they approach it. And that's kind of the way that we approach it as well. Excited to see what they can do on Sunday.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how Jerry Jeudy bounces back from his 5-drop game last Sunday against the Chargers. So Beth, how important do you think it'll be for Drew Lock to continue to look for and get the ball to Jerry Jeudy in this final game?
I would imagine that they're going to try and establish that connection pretty quickly in the game, just to see if they can get off on the right foot and to build a lot of confidence as they move forward. So we're looking probably to see those guys try and connect very early in the game to reestablish that rapport and to start rebuilding that confidence. It's another one of the interesting similarities when you talk about Jerry Jeudy with the Broncos and Henry Ruggs with the Raiders, the first two guys off the board. And then you look around the league, it was such a great wide receiver draft, the first two rounds, and a lot of other guys putting up big numbers. So I think both Jerry and Henry Ruggs, the Raiders definitely want to try and get him some more touches as well, since he was still, based on what they were saying, he was still feeling the effects of the COVID last week and wasn't at his best. So two young guys that want to really go out on a positive note into the offseason.
Well, it will be up to Drew Lock to get the ball into Jerry Jeudy's hands this week. And speaking of Drew, he's really had some ups and downs so far throughout this audition season. So what do you think he needs to show in this final game on Sunday to prove to John Elway and company that he's the guy that they should continue building this team around?
Well, I think first and foremost, as Bronco fans know, is you've got to take care of the football. And I believe it's 11 straight games now with a turnover for Drew, whether it's an interception or a fumble. So first and foremost, I think he's got to show that he is capable of much better ball security. That's going to be the big thing. I think that the Bronco Brain Trust will be taking a closer look at on tape throughout the offseason. So I want to see Drew have a clean game. And I also want to see him develop that rapport with the younger guys. And in particular, I think as we've talked about, Jeudy is critical. Getting things going with Noah Fant, that seems to have been a good connection second half of the season. I think Noah is a guy, a couple catches away from being the first Bronco tight end to have 100 catches in his first two seasons. So if you're a young quarterback, these other young pieces are still going to be in the building. I would think you would want to really develop your relationship with those two guys on Sunday in particular.
Well, one thing Drew Lock will not have to worry about this offseason is meeting a new coach and learning a new system. We learned on Sunday that head coach Vic Fangio will be back here in Denver in 2021, and presumably offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur as well. So just how critical is it for this young quarterback and this young roster as a whole to really have some continuity as this team looks to have some success in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, right? Especially in the NFL, when you're going to have guys coming and going, whether it's through free agency or whether it's through trades, and you're not quite sure who's going to be back in the room with you from year to year. But the expectation, I think, is at least if we've established something with a lot of our younger guys and we're doing it together, there's a much better chance moving forward that we'll have that opportunity. You got to believe they're probably going to look at a veteran quarterback to maybe bring in competition wise. And certainly it looks like a very deep draft from the quarterback position for first round opportunities. So are you going to look at a guy like a Trey Lance or a Kyle Trask if they're still around? Looks like the Broncos are around the 9th or 10th pick right now in the draft. So I think Drew in particular wants to set the tone that he's the guy to beat because chances are there will be some competition if he is in Denver next year.
Well, Vic Fangio, like a lot of coaches this year, has had to turn lemons into lemonade week in and week out. The Broncos are without half of their defensive starters this week. Bradley Chubb's status is still up in the air. So Beth, what are your overall impressions of this Denver defense and what they've been able to do this year without so many of their biggest stars?
Well, I think we're seeing a couple of things that you have to have in the NFL, right? You have to have your edge rushers and you have to have your cornerbacks. And similar story really for the Raiders as well this year. They have not been able to get the pressure that they wanted, certainly without Von Miller in the lineup. That's been an issue in Denver. And then all the injuries at the cornerback position. I think I counted they've had 5 different starters playing corner for them this year. So I'm anxious to see how some of those young guys continue to improve and what this defense could look like with all the pieces in place. The injuries too up front and the interior part of the D-line were certainly a big factor. So I got to believe they're looking at an interior guy or a linebacker that can also cover, or another corner in the draft as well. They went heavy offense last year, 3 of the first 4 picks. So I got to think that they're looking defense this time around.
Well, like we talked about earlier, neither the Broncos nor the Raiders have playoff hopes this week. But who do you think needs this win more heading into the offseason?
Ooh, I think that probably if you're looking at it from a standpoint of really trying to establish something that you can show your fan base you're headed in the right direction. We already know the Broncos, the wins are going to be down from a year ago. The Raiders, on the other hand, have a chance to improve from 7-9 to 8-8. It's not the winning record or the playoff record they were hoping for, but I think a lot is on the line considering that their second half of the season this year looked exactly like it did a year ago. They could not finish. And so I think it's critical, especially after the way they lost to Miami. I know both teams lost heartbreakers last week, but the way they lost that Miami game, what is their mindset coming in? So I think there's probably a much bigger carrot dangling in front of the Raiders this week, and it'll be interesting to see how they respond after that heartbreaking defeat.
Well, thank you so much for your insight on this game, Beth. We cannot wait to hear you call the game this Sunday. But speaking of calling games, we have to learn a little bit more about your amazing career and how you became the first woman in 30 years to call an NFL game and the first to ever call it on a national network. So let's start from the very beginning. When did you know that you wanted to be a sports broadcaster?
Well, I was one of those annoying people that I've always known what I wanted to do. Um, and so I was able to start from a very early age. I played sports growing up. My dad was a high school basketball coach. And, growing up with three brothers and all the little kids in the neighborhood playing sports, that's always been my day to day. It's always what I've done is play sports. And I was able to do that, play a little basketball in college as well. So I think that I've always been able to use that background to my advantage. I watched Phyllis George on the NFL Today show, and Gail Sarens, who was the first woman to call a game back in the late 80s. And so those two were very inspirational for me to kind of show me the way and show me that it could be done if I put the work in. And of course, Denver always has a special place in my heart because that was the very first Monday night football game with the Broncos and the Chargers that went right down to the wire. And so also the opportunity to go back to Denver at the end of that season a few years back for the first start of a guy named Patrick Mahomes for the Chiefs. So I love coming to town, and I always loved, seeing Mile High in the skyline. And I'm really looking forward to getting back and continuing the next chapter.
Well, speaking of that game, September 11th, 2017, take us back to that week of preparation. What was it like? What were you feeling?
You know what? It was a situation where I had an understanding of how significant it was and what was kind of going on around me with all the media attention and all the interviews and things like that. But, as best I could, I treated it like any other game, and my preparation was the same. And, you want to make sure you have good questions and conversation when you talk with coaches. You want to make sure you are developing a good rapport with your partner, and all those kinds of little things. You want to take care of the details and be prepared for anything so that you can enjoy everything. And that's kind of, how things came together. We had a terrific crew. I had some of my old friends that I grew up with, some of my college buddies that were in town with me for moral support, and who knew me when I was that college kid that was honing my craft and working on the trade as best I could. And it was a great week and a great night and a fabulous game that we got to call. And that's really all you can hope for. You hope for a close game with a fantastic finish, and we're looking forward to that on Sunday as well.
Well, no doubt, Beth, you've certainly had a fantastic career. What were some of those early decisions you made to help you get on the path to where you are today?
Well, I think first and foremost, I got some great advice and some great support around me that a lot of people said, go get an English degree, do a lot of reading and writing, go liberal arts. So you're constantly working on your communication skills. You're constantly developing layers of more information, more background that you can use in any type of situation. And then work on your broadcast journalism and your sportscasting nights, weekends. See if you can pick up a few paychecks along the way as a runner or a PA or somebody on the sideline pulling cables, all kinds of stuff that I was doing in local TV in the Syracuse market. And then I went and got my master's at Syracuse which is, one of the best broadcasting schools in the world. We think it's number one. And so that was all kind of laying the groundwork, because ultimately it's still a people business. And so how do you communicate with people? How do you work with your team, with your crew? How are you networking with people to find out where sort of the next step is along the way for you to keep moving up the ladder and getting better and better opportunities? And it all started with the people around me, the people in my huddle that were, giving you the kick in the fanny or the pat on the back, whatever it was that you needed to get through the day and get through that adversity that you were facing.
English degree. I don't think I've heard that yet.
Yes.
That's a great
Mm-hmm.
advice though. Whoever told you to do that.
Yep. That's where I first met my dear friend, Mark Twain, who gives me the best quote in the world. Why wouldn't you go out on a limb? That's where the fruit is. And that's what I love to tell, especially young women that are trying to get into sportscasting and trying to get a footing in this business. You got to take chances. You got to put yourself out there in positions where you might fail, and then pick yourself up, improve, learn from those, and keep climbing out on that limb and keep chasing that fruit.
You talk about positions in which you might fail. Were there any challenges you faced along the way? And maybe if so, how did you overcome them?
I think you have to, as quickly as you can, make yourself comfortable in situations that normally would be pretty uncomfortable. So, when I was first starting out, you were often the only girl in the room. And so I had the advantage of being a coach's kid, where I was the only girl in the gym for practice. 3 brothers. I was always the only girl in the room when we were roughhousing as youngsters and playing kickball and wiffle ball and football in the backyard. And so I think those things I was able to use to my advantage in situations when I was starting out, where I was the only woman on a crew, and just felt completely comfortable in that. The other thing I think that is critical is you have to gain confidence. So you have to be as prepared as you can. You have to get in as many repetitions as you can. A lot of times that was talking into a recorder. That was sitting in front of the TV with the volume down, just working on my play-by-play, standing in front of the mirror. So you start feeling more and more comfortable as if you're on camera and doing your reports or doing your open hits and things like that. All, I think, work in your benefit so that you feel comfortable in what could be an uncomfortable situation.
Well, there are definitely more female broadcasters and play-by-play analysts today than there were even 10 years ago. But as a whole, why do you think there are so few women in these roles? And what do you think's next for women in terms of kind of taking over some of these roles that have generally been dominated by men?
Yeah. I think probably one of the things is, for a lot of young girls, a lot of teenage girls, we tend not to want to be in positions of leadership. We tend to want to fit in. And so the play-by-play role or the analyst role is, pretty significant. You're out in front, you're leading the discussion, you're sharing your opinions. You better be on top of it, because you will be scrutinized very closely. So it's a position that I like to say you want to have the ball. And so when I was growing up as a point guard, I always wanted to have the ball, and that translated into, the decision making that helped me out as a play-by-play announcer as well. I think too, it's what we talked about a little earlier. If you see somebody doing it, then you start thinking you can do it. And for years, most roles open to women were on the sideline. And so that was the role, I think, that a lot of young women have been drawn to over the years. And now we're starting to see, yes, there are still a lot of women that want to be sideline reporters, but now there are also a lot of women that want to be anchors and that want to be play-by-play and that want to be color commentators. And they know that if that's their true passion, then they can chase that.
Well, Beth, you've done an amazing job at paving that path for hopeful female play-by-play broadcasters. You've called college basketball, NBA on CBS, NCAA championships, and basketball, softball, soccer, and volleyball. The Women's College World Series for more than 20 years, the 2011 Women's World Cup in Germany. The list goes on and on. Beth, out of all of those events, is there one in particular that stands out to you? Which one was your favorite?
Oh boy. I always like to say that football is probably the biggest deal, because that's the biggest audience. It's one game a week, so your preparation is much more significant. The buildup is much more significant. Basketball is home for me. That's what I grew up playing and played in college and have always been around. So I've always known the language and the sort of the rhythms of the game, the strategy. And then I've really grown to love the Women's College World Series year in and year out. To be able to put your voice on national championships is pretty cool. And to see young girls when they're 10 years old say, but I hope that I can play in front of you guys one day. And then you're at the World Series and you're doing interviews and somebody sits down and says, remember me? I talked to you when I was 10 years old and now I'm here playing in this. And then 10 years later, they talk about how much they love the memories of those moments. So that's kind of how I probably break it down. But that Monday night in Denver, that was pretty special. That was pretty near the top.
One last question for you, Beth. Throughout all of those experiences, what advice would you give women in the industry, no matter what area of it they want to work in?
I think first and foremost, and a lot of advice that I got from a lot of people when I was coming up is you have to do it your way. You have to do it with your voice. You have to be as much as you can yourself. If you're a little bit of a goofball or if you have a really good sense of humor, don't be afraid to hide that. Use that to your advantage. If you are, extremely into the strategy side of things, by all means, use that to your advantage. And if you're gonna make it your way. If you're gonna, come up a little short, at least you did it by being true to yourself. And I think that's probably the most important thing to do, is to find your own voice and find what you're really great at and make that your life's work.
Well, Beth, I know I can speak on behalf of Sydney when I say that we are just so grateful to have had this opportunity to meet you and learn more about such an amazing journey that you've had. Thank you for being a role model for us and for so many other women working in sports. We do appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Alexis, Sydney, appreciate it.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's edition of The Snap. We hope you'll meet us right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and on the official Broncos YouTube channel next week for another fun episode. We'll see you then.